I get to see Erika exhort restaurateurs thrice a week. And so it is my delight for the first time ever to have the National Restaurant Association, the Independent Restaurant Coalition, and the James Beard Foundation, indisputably the most leading entities of our industry, all together on one stage with the indomitable Andrew Zimmern. So with that said, I am going to do a little bit of macro framing of our situation. Might be familiar to most of you, but for those of you who are not from the restaurant industry, I think this is really important. Then introductions of our panelists. And I'd love for this to be as interactive a dialogue as possible. So if I pose a question to any one of you, and if anyone else wants to weigh in, please feel free to do so. We're going to take questions somewhere in the middle, 40 to 60% of our panel, keep it as interactive as possible. So keep them streaming in. And with that said, the macro framing. I don't think people outside of the restaurant industry, despite all the coverage, get a sense or appreciate really how important this industry is to our country. I mean, it's $1 trillion in GDP, yes, that's 4%. But the multiplier and the magnifier effect is tremendous when you consider the entire ecosystem of vendors, suppliers, tech platforms, right down to farming, the seafood industry, the gamut. It is a multiplier or magnifier of at least 2 or 3 times that. And directly, we employ 10% of the US workforce, according to the Labor Department. 2/3 of that are in small businesses. 4 million of our employees are still unemployed today. And that is definitely an understatement if you don't include the undocumented, which is a huge pillar of our industry. So that is at the macro level. And we are now at like the most critical juncture of our industry. As restaurateurs, we are viscerally living it. For the last 8 to 9 months, we have been limping along at a 20 to 30% capacity utilization, with closures, with restrictions, with very rational fear of dining out. And there is no end in sight. It is only worse. The last million in our virus spread came over the last 6 days. It is now winter, flu season. Yes, we have a vaccine, but it's going to take till at least June or July for FDA testing, production, mass administration, and all of that. So we are really, we've been digging ourselves into a deeper hole. We are all in debt. Thousands of us are closed. And it's been estimated by the James Beard Foundation and the IRC that 85% of us are in peril of closure. So that's the visceral reality of where we are today as restaurateurs. With that grim framing, I'm going to do a rapid round of introductions of our panelists and ask them to speak for 30 seconds about the organizations that they represent within the frame of solutions for restaurants and this whole crisis that we are in. So I'm going to start with Tom. Tom is the president and the CEO of the National Restaurant Association since June of this year. He comes with an incredible background in food service and consumer products. He was the president of Pepsi Food Service. He was the president and CEO of Cisco. He also is, and this is my partial passion, he also was on the board of the Women's Food Service Forum for a good 5 years. So, and Tom happens to be the most accessible president of a large association that I've ever met. He actively reaches out and he listens. So with that said, Tom, would you like to speak about the NRA for a little bit to the audience?
Sure, thanks, Rohini. It's great to be here with you and the other panelists. I really appreciate the opportunity. For those who don't know, the National Restaurant Association is the largest organization supporting the restaurant industry. We have about 47,000 members between the state associations and the national association. And we're split between all different types of restaurant owners and operators. About 53% are represented by independents. That's of our voting board members. And obviously of the total 47,000 owners, many, many more, very high percentage of them are independent operators. As you think about the focus we've had over the last 8 months, clearly from March 14th, when the first shutdowns happened in New Jersey, we've been very focused on the restaurant industry. Our vision is very simple. It's about a thriving restaurant food service community. It's about providing America with nourishment, opportunity, and joy, and working to enhance the quality of life for all. And for me, the one thing that I've said consistently since I got into this role is that we need as an industry to represent the entire industry, and we need to show up as one. And we can talk more about that. But when I say that we support not only suppliers, distributors, and operators, but states, national, as well as making sure that we think about all types of restaurant owners and operators, as well as the employees in the industry. So things like the Educational Foundation is a great example of where we support many employees in the industry. We can talk more about that, but one very quick thing we did very quickly was the Restaurant Employee Relief Fund, where we awarded 43,000 restaurant employees $500 basically grants to get through the early days of the pandemic. Whether it was work like that or the work we do with racial and gender equity, as you mentioned, Rohini, lots of things going on across the association and educational foundation that I look forward to talking about. And last but not least, we're out there advocating on behalf of the industry on a regular basis, including with our Restaurant Law Center and the work we do every day, both at Capitol Hill and also within the state associations. So a little bit about us, and looking forward to being part of this panel discussion today.
Thank you, Tom. Andrew Zimmern really needs no introduction. I mean, with his larger-than-life TV persona, multiple shows under his belt, chef skills, humanist, advocate, and really an intellectual activist. Andrew, I've known through a couple of panels. I have been on the James Beard Foundation Award stage with him. I've considered a presidential run with him. With that framing, Andrew, what would you like to say to our industry at this juncture? A quick 30 seconds.
Well, I sit here today as a restaurant owner, a restaurant investor, a restaurant partner, and the owner of a hospitality company here in the upper Midwest in the great state of Minnesota. I've been very actively involved earlier in my career with the National Restaurant Association for the last 18 years, very active within the James Beard Foundation, represented today by Clare Reichenbach, our current CEO. And since March, when I was one of the co-founders of the Independent Restaurant Coalition, Erika Polmar is our COO. So I'm thrilled to be on the panel with all of you guys. I am in these days just insisting that we be solution oriented in our lives, not just on this panel. I'm talking about in how we move going forward. We, as Tom so eloquently put it, and as you did, Rohini, as well, when you framed the macro conversation, we are in a unprecedented crisis, a lot of which is invisible right now. I liken it to the early days of the Vietnam War. We don't see pictures of what's going on. But if you drive down Main Street in small towns in Minnesota, you sure get a good idea of what this pandemic is doing to communities all across this country. And the only thing that I would add, simply because I spent so much of my career making food and travel television for various Discovery networks, that long list of octopus arms that the restaurant industry wraps itself around, one of the biggest pillars is tourism. And that's been devastating for restaurants, especially in cities like New Orleans, for example, where they have a very, very small population, very, very large restaurant group because they get 40, 50 million visitors a year. So I'm looking forward to the questions and hearing what my colleagues have to say and contributing where I can. So thank you for organizing this.
My pleasure entirely, Andrew. Erika is the COO of the Independent Restaurant Coalition. Erika has been active in food and policy for decades in Oregon. She's been working on agritourism actively there, and now has shifted gears to go into the federal level of policy advocacy with the IRC. Erika, Over to you.
Thank you so much, Rohini, and thank you, Claire, and the entire JBF team for convening this gathering today. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm very grateful for all the work you've done to put it together. The Independent Restaurant Coalition is a grassroots organization that was formed at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. We represent 500,000 neighborhood restaurants and bars and the 11 million people they employ directly. Our members crafted the language that became the Restaurants Act. This is the darkest month for restaurants since March. Cases are spiking. There's huge indoor dining closures, as you mentioned, Rohini, and the impending winter weather is threatening the outdoor dining that's kept us afloat. Many of us will not survive. In my community alone, in the past 2 weeks, 175 restaurants have closed. It's my hope that the moment we end this conversation today, everyone watching, including my fellow panelists, will pick up the phone and join the Independent Restaurant Coalition in urging the Senate to pass the Restaurants Act before it's too late.
Last but certainly not least is Clare Reichenbach. Clare is the CEO of the James Beard Foundation. Clare brings a huge background in strategy, operations across leading media groups. She's been the EVP of BBC, AMC. She's had her own consulting firm, and now she brings all of this acumen and strategy to the James Beard Foundation at this really critical juncture. Clare, you want to share?
And great to be with this wonderful group this morning. There's great symbiosis across these different organizations and representation. So the James Beard Foundation, probably best known for our annual awards and the dining events we hold around the country. But fundamentally, everything we do is in support of a better food system and supporting the health of the independent restaurant industry. We are for the industry, we are of the industry. And when COVID hit earlier in the year, we reorientated and redirected all our energy, effort, resource, financing to support the industry get through this, recognizing just the devastating impact of this on our industry. So in terms of advocacy, funding, resource, support, networking, everything we're doing right now is to help our industry get through this, to survive, to stabilize, and then looking forward to seeing what we can do to help bring back the industry better and use this as an opportunity to reset. But fundamentally, we are here in support of the independent restaurant industry.
I'm going to start with a question for Tom, and Claire, perhaps you may want to weigh in as well. Little bit of framing. So when the 2008 crisis happened, the government jumped in within a month. September is when everything failed, when the financial institutions just crashed. By October, we had a $700 billion TARP relief plan signed and in place with the Fed and the president. This rescued automobiles and financial institutions, and it was the right thing to do. Why has this not happened for our industry? I mean, yes, we got the PPP, and let me frame that a little bit, take a moment. It was a $660 billion PPP. Only 40 billion of that went to restaurants and lodging, which is hotels, less than 8%, and barely a fraction of that to restaurants, even a further fraction of that to independent restaurants. It was an 8-week payroll band-aid for a 9-month ridiculously dire situation. So Tom, why is relief so late coming to our industry, and why is it not enough? What's your take on that? Because you're at the fulcrum of representing hundreds and thousands of us in DC.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. I think I'm not sure it's all that appropriate to compare it to the 2008 crisis, but because I think we're dealing with very different things. But I think, specifically, I would say a couple of things that in that situation, and maybe more appropriately in our situation today, an industry like banking is certainly affects tens of thousands, if not all, people in the U.S. And so I think from a financial stability for the country, that made a lot of sense. Can't speak as much to the automotive industry at that time and why they felt that was so important, other than there were a few very large employers that they could easily touch with some of that legislation. If you think about more recently, the early parts of the pandemic, things like airlines, why they may have gotten support is they represent a large amount of employees, but they're represented by really 10 major employers. And so I think in their case, they're able to go pretty quickly to the government with a very aligned plan. And I think that's probably one of the most important things is they had an aligned effort. They were very much together, and not just the big folks we all think of when we fly, but also some smaller regional carriers who all came together. That association, as an example, only has 10 members. So when you think about it, they really needed 10 people to come together and come quickly with a plan. That I think is one example of why they may have gotten some support. I do think the work that we did in conjunction with others in the industry to really drive the PPP program and specifically the Flexibility Act, which was tailored to better support restaurants while not perfect, I think is an example of how when we work together, we can get things done. And I look back just to that point when Chip Roy in Texas got together with the Texas Restaurant Association, and they crafted language that was necessary to build that Flexibility Act, and then how all of the industry came together to partner in a very important meeting with the president. And when asked a few very specific questions, all responded in the same manner, which was, these are the things we need to support restaurants, not this general program. And to your point, while it's still not enough, and we have so many needs well beyond that initial PPP program, I think there's examples of when we do come together, good things can happen.
So it's a systemic failure in representing ourselves, as well as the fact that there's no concentration of employers that made it so difficult to save all of us is what I'm taking away from your.
Well, I think the reality is that if a couple of locations close, that's not like the banking system falling apart. If a couple big banks fail, it's a very different environment, right? So yes, the fact that we are.
When you add it up, it's the magnitude is enormous, as you
No question.
You're aware more than anyone else. Claire, please.
Well, hence the impetus for the need for the IRC at this time. Because as you say, the independent restaurant industry comprises hundreds of thousands of independent businesses that have operated in a pretty disparate manner, understandably. But in bringing them together, coalescing under a single unified voice has had impact in terms of raising the value and the importance of this industry in the eyes of our legislators. And I think it's now understood and valued more than ever before, but this has given a great impetus to the need to come together with that united voice for those very reasons.
I would only say though, Claire, and the fact that we are not coming together as one, meaning all restaurants, is creating, I think, a challenge. And I think when there's mixed messages being sent to legislators, that creates a situation where it's easy for them to do nothing. And I think the point I would make is that the independent restaurants, of which we have many in the national, the IRC, all of us coming together need to be doing so in a way so that that messaging is crystal clear. And that clarity of message, I think, will make a huge impact. But the fact that we've not been crystal clear and we've had differences of points of view, from our standpoint, we are inclusive. We exclude no one. And the fact that certain organizations are excluding certain parts of the industry, I think creates challenge.
I'll come back to that, Tom, but let me switch gears to Andrew. Andrew, you obviously saw a void in representation for independent restaurants. And I'm just going to take a moment here to flag why I'm focused on independent restaurants. This is half the entities. It's 500,000 of the 1 million restaurants. These are the restaurants which are the most vulnerable with the least access to cash. These are the restaurants that power tourism. While I love my McDonald's salad and burger, I'm not going to drive to Florida for that or wherever. They're the ones that power tourism for leisure, for travel, for corporate, for everything. And they're the ones most in need of relief. And Andrew, you sensed that void in March. Tell us about that. How did you actually make change happen, and how did you start the IRC at that juncture?
Well, the genesis for it actually, thank you, Rohini. The genesis for it actually started about 5 years earlier at a food festival where 10 or 12 of us were standing around at 2 in the morning at a pool party, decrying the fact that all of our social justice efforts seemed like we were throwing money into a bucket that had a bigger hole at the bottom than it did at the top, and we weren't really making change. And several of us talked about the need to address policy on Capitol Hill. First and foremost, we needed to be able to empower our industry and our social justice advocacy backed by lawmaking, that it was only by creating legal opportunities that we could really be most effective instead of doing countless numbers of dinners trying to raise awareness. So when the pandemic hit, that same group of people started talking to each other and to their friends. And I think it was about 30 or 32 of us were on an email that went around. And within a couple of days, we had formed our group. We got some financial help from several different entities, including the James Beard Foundation. Thank you, Clare, and thank you to the board of the JBF. And we engaged with some help in Washington, D.C., and we have continued to fundraise and advocate with a tremendous amount of singleness of purpose. First, in addressing the fix-it for the PPP, a piece of Swiss cheese legislation. I fault no one for creating it. It was like building an airplane while you were flying it, but it had holes, it had problems, it had limitations. The piece of legislation that Tom was talking about was co-sponsored by my Congressman, Dean Phillips of Minnesota, along with Chip Roy. Dean is a small business owner and cafe and coffee shop owner, as well as being a lifelong entrepreneur and businessman, and was a driving force in his bipartisan caucus that he is a part of in Washington, and a very strong advocate for restaurants. Within a matter of weeks, we got very, very serious because we realized that PPP needed to be focused on. Once that was fixed, and we got the best extension that we could and the best outcome that we could, we focused with laser-like attention on the passage of the Restaurants Act. It's a $120 billion fund that is necessary to keep Main Street restaurants employing their workers, keeping food coming in the door and keeping the food system alive. The coalescing and the necessary handholding that is required, I encourage Tom and the NRA to support the Independent Restaurant Coalition in any way that they would like to. We'd be thrilled to have their support. We're just two very different organizations. We are laser focused in getting the Restaurants Act passed, full stop. And I think the reason that we have been so laser focused on our own rowboat, so to speak, is that independent restaurants have always been a junior voice at the table. You mentioned, Rohini, that the big chain restaurants and small chain restaurants and big restaurant groups, everyone other than the independent restaurants, have access to capital. They're able to weather the storm. They are able to, they have the cash to be able to pivot and redesign their kitchens to ensure the safety of their workers. So many restaurants were not able to do that. You know, people look at independent restaurants, they like to think of sort of, you know, the fancy restaurants represented and owned by people that they see on TV. That's just a sliver of a percentage of the restaurants that make up that vast majority of independent restaurants in America. Those independent restaurants in America are the small mom and pop businesses that desperately need our help. They're the ones that are caretakers of the trust tax and of the public health and of so many other valuable contributions to Main Street. And I think that of anyone, they are deserving of support. I think the last thing that I would add, and you brought up the car industry, and Tom referenced the airline industry. There have been some very, very frivolous conversations on Capitol Hill about other industries that might need money. The cruise ship industry, for example, which generates a sliver of the GDP that we do, that employs only a handful of people compared to what independent restaurants do, that pays very little taxes compared to what independent restaurants do, but they happen to have a large voice in on Capitol Hill in terms of lobbying and making their presence known. One of the things that I'm proudest of in helping to create the Independent Restaurant Coalition is that now independent restaurants, while we have our focus on this $120 billion Restaurants Act, I have a sneaky suspicion we are never going away. We have a seat at the table. We can now affect policy, and we can be an effective voice on Capitol Hill for change. And I think we're going to really, really need it in the weeks, months, and years moving forward.
Rohini, may I add?
Erika, I'm actually coming to you right now. so you add to that and add much more.
I would just like to point out that you mentioned, the depth and breadth of the support to something like the automobile industry. And I think it's really important that we take a minute to note that only about 1/3 of restaurants and bars, which happen to be America's second largest private sector employer, only 1/3 are in large chains. So those large chains are publicly traded. The rest, the other 2/3, are independently owned restaurants. Right? Those restaurants, although they may currently have a home in the NRA, and the NRA has done a great job of supporting them in this moment, were voiceless. And that's why the IRC came into being. And it's those very same independent operators that looked at all of the problems and started to devise solutions that they knew would work for them. And that solution is the Restaurants Act.
So Erika, you introduced us to the core role of the IRC. I do want to take a moment here to pause in case anyone's getting the impression that we are against any industry getting support. Everyone is in crisis. Travel has crashed, hospitality has crashed, retail has crashed, everything has crashed. So we are all in favor of support, as is Jerome Powell. He's been pushing the Fed for a massive stimulus for months, and he's been talking so much about how too little now is going to cause calamity. It is just a logjam in Congress that's causing havoc. Thousands of us are closing every day. You talk about Main Street in small towns, Andrew. On my street on Hubbard, which is in the thick of downtown Chicago, bustling place, 3 restaurants are open and 9 are boarded up on my block. My block. It's and it's not just 2008 where people got solutions. Today, the Fed has unlimited quantitative easing, which means unlimited debt, direct lending to corporations. So any corporation can issue any amount of junk bonds and get relief if you're a large corporation, not so for small businesses. So with that segue, Erika, Andrew spoke to your laser focus. How do you, and I've been on some of your leadership calls, how have you made the IRC so effective so fast with all your grassroots campaigning and visibility? And break down for us the Restaurants Act, HEROES, the HEALS Act, PPP. What is all this for the average restaurateur out there? If the Restaurants Act were to be passed, what do they get actually? So all of this really quickly, whatever you can say.
Oh my gosh, all of that really quickly. Let's start with why the IRC is effective and how we have mobilized this coalition. As we mentioned earlier, we're representing 500,000 neighborhood restaurants. We started with a phone call of 18 people and within weeks grew to 180. And from there, we have a reach of over 80,000 nationwide. Each and every person that participates in our calls, whether they're on occasionally or whether they're joining us every week, is passionately committed to getting this work done because their lives, their staff's lives, and their communities depend on it. I can't fabricate a better motivation than survival. All the IRC has done is unite those voices and put all of those brains together to create the solutions that we need and the willingness to not take no for an answer and get it done. And if you look at independent restaurants, they've spent all of their lives being told no, or that's a crazy idea, or that's never gonna fly. And each and every time they double down and they get the work done. And this is no different. when we came together, like I said, our members identified the challenges and the solutions they needed. And we got busy and we started talking and creating a buzz. And through our network, we connected restaurant owners with our restaurant owners connected with people like Representative Blumenauer, my congressman, and Senator Wicker in Mississippi to discuss the solutions that we came up with. And that is what formed the Restaurants Act. And once we did that, we looked past our doors to the suppliers and the communities that support us in our daily business. And lo and behold, hundreds of farmers, bakers, distilleries, and other suppliers from around the country joined our calls to Congress to provide the financial support that we need to stay afloat so that they too can survive the pandemic. Because of this united front, the Restaurants Act has bipartisan support from over 210 members of the House and half of the US Senate. So we may be small and we may have only been in existence for 8 months, but we united have a strong voice and a full commitment to getting this done.
Erika, can I interrupt you for a moment, because you're at the meat of the IRC's mission. So now you have this $120 billion of the Restaurants Act that's been rolled into heroes and passed by the House. And the House has asked for 3.3 trillion, or had asked for 3.3 trillion to be passed as stimulus. Together, the compromise offered, that came down to 1.8 trillion, right, to be passed through the Senate. And the Senate is at 1.1. Now, Mitch McConnell is at 500 million, a whole different number. Where is the Restaurants Act? Is it earmarked and safeguarded, the 120 billion, regardless of how the stimulus shrinks or plays out?
It's our job to keep guarding it. So the Restaurants Act was included in the HEROES Act, but the Restaurant Act existed on its own in the Senate thanks to Senator Roger Wicker as a $120 billion grant fund. So we keep championing the work in the Senate and urging our senators to take up the Restaurants Act and get it to the finish line.
Can it be carved out of the heroes, so that it's, because it has bipartisan support, but it's the heroes that doesn't have bipartisan support. So can it be carved out? Would that be more effective?
The Restaurants Act is carved out of the heroes as well, because it's not coming to the Senate as part of a larger stimulus package. It existed in the Senate in the beginning as the Restaurants Act, thanks to Senator Roger Wicker.
Yeah, and I would point out that $120 billion, even the United States Chamber of Commerce 6 weeks ago came out with a detailed paper echoing what so many other private companies had come out and said, which is that if restaurants don't get that $120 billion, it's going to cost the taxpayers $270 billion over the next year, because of the size of our industry and the number of people who would be unemployed and the extinction event that we would see for restaurants. Sorry, Claire, go ahead.
So let's switch gears a little bit to our own entities. Otherwise, I know we could spend the entire hour on the Restaurants Act. But Claire, coming to you, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what else has the James Beard Foundation done during this era or during this period to save restaurants, and how are you thinking about this going forward? Because if a stimulus, it may come, it may not. Even if it does come, it could take 6 to 8 months to disperse, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. What the industry needs is scale, bespoke investment and financial relief, without question, and that's the #1 priority. And we're doing all we can to keep the Restaurant Act visible and not conflating it with the HEROES Act, just keep being laser focused on that. And the hope is, with everyone coming to the table between now and the end of year in terms of agreeing funding for government and the admissions bill, that is another opportunity to get this passed, and especially with the Senate in the balance and with Georgia runoffs at play, the hope is that Mitch McConnell won't be wanting to be seen as obstructionist, and that there may be an opportunity to get this through. From the foundation standpoint, we launched a campaign called Open for Good that has advocacy and support of the IRC at its core, but also direct financing. We, with Andrew's help, in fact, we We raised over nearly $5 million at the beginning of COVID that we dispersed in individual grants to restaurants. And we've had a whole series of critical resource and support and guidelines like the safety guidelines that we partnered with Aspen Institute on. We continue with each of those pillars of support. We've just launched a new fund for Black and Indigenous Americans in culinary. Again, this will be discrete grants of $15,000. We're fundraising for that. We're looking to start to disperse those in the new year. We continue with our advocacy work, amplifying the work of the IRC, amplifying the resource from the NRA, and to continue with our bootcamp training and mobilizing our bootcamp alumni. In terms of critical resource, we have this incredible cadence of webinars and support systems. Just earlier in the month, there was a whole series about business models and business resilience. On Monday, we partnered with Raise in terms of making available anti-bias training. Tomorrow, we have a session about mental health coming up before the holidays. We are just building a program all about conflict resolution and de-escalation, how to deal with recalcitrant diners. We have the next wave of partnership activity with the Aspen Institute with our Diners Code of Conduct and Design Guide, and so it goes on. So fundamentally, money is needed, but we're trying to really mobilize all our energies to provide very pragmatic help. We're also building a series of lists in terms of the best outdoor equipment, the best takeout materials, because people are reinventing the wheel with all of this stuff as the business model keeps changing across the nation. So we want to kind of centralize that. So we have a portal called openforgood.com, which is a central repository for all of this resource. And I really encourage anybody on this call who's not connected with us, please go and register there.
And
Rohini,
Tom,
if I could just,
I'd love to, with your fresh and new leadership lens and the NRA's amazing reach and heft, the same question for you. How do you see the NRA helping independent restaurant scope? I'm gonna focus on that lens. And also, if I, as a restaurateur, how do I leverage the NRA? Because I know how to work with the state chapters, but is there a direct nexus at all?
yeah, so let's talk about a couple of things. So first of all, we are already doing a lot for independent restaurants. As I said earlier, a majority of our members between the state and the national are in fact independent restaurants. And so whether it's talking about the $120 billion Restaurants Act, which we also supported as our #1 priority under our restaurant revival program, our blueprint for restaurant revival, or additional PPP or other types of things that we know are critically important to this industry, we have been advocating for all of those things since day one. But when we talk about programming that is being developed in other places, I want to reinforce that we've been doing this for 100 years in the Restaurant Association. All of these things that are available today. So training around food safety, training around reopening guidance. We partnered with the FDA and the CDC to bring reopening guidance to this industry. So the types of things that people are talking about doing, I would implore us to come together and not duplicate or replicate things that are already there. Our members today, and if you're a member of a state, you're automatically a member of the national. So it's not about you need to join the national and join the state. When you are a state member, you get immediate access to everything we're doing. The amount of information that many of you are using, information that we are creating through our research and through our different departments within the National Restaurant Association, are examples of the types of things that are available to everyone. In addition, when I think about educational programming for the industry, whether it's apprenticeships for restaurant management or programs around justice-involved youth and bringing them back into the industry, military service members, how we prepare high school students for jobs in the culinary arts through ProStart, our HOPES program. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of things that are available. And what excited me about this opportunity was to bring my experience as a supplier and as a distributor to partner with operators to bring all these great things to bear. And so this suggestion or idea that the national is not supporting independence is just false. I mean, the reality is that we do most of what we do to support our independent members. They are the ones who need the resources, need the help. The big national chains have all of that already. And today, what we advocate is for anyone who needs support, Okay, so if you're a chain that had drive-through and you don't need support, guess what? They're not asking for it and we're not providing it. So this is not about trying to divisively separate this industry. In our case, about trying to bring it together and leverage all the things going on with all these different organizations. That's where the real value is added. When I think about the work we do with our Multicultural Food Service and Hospitality Alliance, this topic of racial equity we know is critically important. The topic of women in food service, Rohini, which is very important to you. We have programs in place that are supporting all of these things. We've just announced a partnership with PepsiCo and with Kareem Webb, who is a Buffalo Wild Wings franchisee, who is helping Black industry leaders get into the business, expand their business, accelerate their business. We're doing the same thing in partnership with the Women's Food Service Forum. So this idea that we are a one-trick pony or we only represent a piece of the industry, I can't honestly in my 4 months understand where that comes from. Because when I think about where I spend my time, I spend more time with our independent owners and operators, and I spend more time with our team thinking about how we can support the independent owner and operator. That's what we do. So I'm baffled why we can't come together, leveraging all of the great work that exists out there, and ultimately come with a common theme and message, which is this industry needs help and support. We fight for that every single day at the federal level, at the state level. You know, when you think about the work we're doing, we are on calls every day, every week with our states and with their members, helping them. The Restaurant Law Center is out there literally filing amicus briefs on behalf of this industry, something that no one else has ever done or has been willing to do. Those are the type of things that we do.
No, that helps a lot. I work really actively with the Illinois Restaurant Association, and I mean, they've been incredibly helpful to me, not just in laws and guidance and closures and lobbying, but also like news on grants and state grants and all of that, which I've leveraged a lot personally. So it wasn't clear to me if there was an avenue to work directly with you or if it's through the state chapters, and this helps a lot. But moving on, Andrew, you asked a very interesting question, and I'll let you answer that for yourself and for us. What if a stimulus doesn't come? What is plan B for us restaurateurs? Or what if it comes too late, 8 months down the line? What are we supposed to do? Any brilliant solutions?
Get a life preserver. I honestly, look, I don't believe that glasses are half full or half empty. I believe the glass is refillable. I believe in that the Senate right now in the lame duck has an incredible opportunity to do something for their constituencies all across America back home. There is no state, there is no municipality in this country that is immune from the problems that we've been discussing today. This is affecting every neighborhood in America. And I would encourage everyone to go to SaveRestaurantscom, use some of our widgets that are on our website, get a hold of your senators and representatives and insist that we get the Restaurants Act passed. It is that simple. There is no world in which I do not see that happening. I just, as you implicated, pray that it's not too late. The image that a lot of people have of restaurants bustling still and managing to do well is because a lot of very smart, entrepreneurial, creative people have pivoted with outdoor dining. They've pivoted with to-go and delivery, but the average restaurant, I think, is doing something like 40% of their previous business. And in an industry where the averages can, for profit per dollar, can be measured in single digit of pennies, you can see the disparity there. People are, in some cases, they're out of business. They just don't know it yet. They've just figured out a way to keep shuffling from month to month to month to keep it open, because as operators, we all want to take care of our employees. There is nothing more important to us. If we don't take care of our own, then we have nothing to offer as hospitality people. If we can't take care of our own, we can't offer hospitality to others. So we are shuffling as fast as we can, and it is vital that we get that Restaurants Act passed. And I would have a friendly amendment to what Tom said, and I see some questions in the chat. This is not about us having different desires. In fact, I see the NRA and the IRC having a tremendous amount of overlapping desire. It's just that the Independent Restaurant Coalition is a new organization, 80,000 strong, that is laser focused today on one single mission. And the National Restaurant Association and their states, as Tom so beautifully put it, is involved in so many different programs across a vast range because they have been around for 100 years, and I applaud their work tremendously. We are not in opposition to one another. We are simply on paths that have a tremendous amount of overlap, but there are some distinctive differences.
And Rohini, I should add, in Andrew's half full, half empty, refillable glass mode, failure is not an option. We have to get this done in one way or another. And it's incumbent upon every single person watching this call now or in a recording to pick up the phone and make that happen.
So we're going to stick to plan A for all of us. And whether it's a stimulus of within a PPP or whether it's the Restaurants Act, that's the imperative for all of us, right? We literally have only 8 minutes left. The only audience question I see is about how are we all going to come together to figure out a way to survive. And each of you has touched upon that a little bit. I'm going to switch gears to what I'd spoken about at the beginning, which is my passion, women in the restaurant industry. If you think of the independent restaurants as being more vulnerable, then within that, women-owned businesses have even less access to cash. And the women restaurateur is not the norm. Most of them don't crack a million in revenue, and very few of them raise external finance or have a buffer. I have, over the last 5 months, with the James Beard Foundation's help, formed a group called Let's Talk. We are in 10 different cities, 250 of us women restaurateurs, and we're all battling together, collaboratively, doing revenue raising activities just to save our businesses. Just literally 30 seconds across each of you. What counsel do you have for women restaurateurs, and how can we leverage either your celebrity, Andrew, the NRA, Tom, JBF is already supporting us, but Clare, anything else for us, and IRC? Andrew, I'll start with you.
Well, I think it's very simple. I hate to be a one message guy, but support the Restaurants Act. Within the Restaurants Act, there is a provision that the first bite at the apple goes to restaurants owned by women and people of color, and that's very, very important to us, people who have previously not had the access to capital that old white guys have. I mean, that's just plain and that's a vital piece of resetting the equity table here. When Erika talks about being failure not being an option, I think we draw on the strength of all of our members, and that underscore the word all of our members to push the Senate to get this passed. To not do so would send 10 million more people to the unemployment line. It is simply an economic disaster of proportions that we have never seen before, and we are already, when it comes to measurements of hunger and other data, we are already in an unseen economic disaster right now. And believe me, there's a lot of people that are seeing one. It's worse than that. It feels like one of those 1970s disaster movies, and nobody can see the volcano about to explode. We have to pass the Restaurants Act.
Tom, you, with your 5 years Women in Food Service Forum expertise, and what really struck me when we conversed, you and I, was you said that it's time to break the old boys club. And I literally wrote that down and underlined it. And so this is with huge optimism. You can change the tone and set a new tone for our industry. And this reckoning is long overdue. So how do you think you can help women in this industry?
Look, I think there's many things that we're already doing. A couple of things I just want to reinforce. And I want to make one last point about the Restaurants Act, because I saw in the chat there was a question about when I say that we're not fully aligned, why are we not fully aligned, or where are we not fully aligned? The difference is that we support the Senate bill, the Restaurants Act in the Senate. And the big difference there is it includes all types of restaurants, including franchisees. And when you think about this underrepresented group of Black, Hispanic, women-owned restaurants, many of them are franchise owners. So our bill and the support we provide, again, is for all restaurant owners. It doesn't depend on what type of restaurant you run. It depends on whether or not you are in need. And so that's the big difference. And the same thing holds true as we think about helping those underrepresented groups. We've got programming. I talked about many of them under the Educational Foundation that are targeted towards minority and underrepresented groups, both in helping them develop their skills and capabilities, get to ownership positions. So within those areas, Rohini, there's opportunities for women and underrepresented groups to flourish. And so we spend a great deal of our time on those type of things. When as you know, when I was with Women's Food Service Forum, one of the things we did is we established a baseline study in the industry. So we knew with operators, with suppliers, with distributors, what the actual facts were. And we need to do that same thing with other underrepresented groups, but that's where it starts. And then putting together specific initiatives and strategies, which we have in the Multicultural and Food Service Hospitality Alliance. We've developed those programs. We've got 4-pronged strategy, and those are the kind of things that are available and accessible to all of our members.
Thank you, Tom. Claire, this is something you can talk to eloquently, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we've been supporting women entrepreneurs and women leaders for many years, and thank you for your leadership, Rohini. But I just want to use this oxygen to reiterate Andrew's comment. I mean, getting the Restaurants Act through will benefit women, will benefit people of color disproportionately. So it's contact your senators, especially the new ones, the ones that haven't signed. That's where our focus should be right now.
Erika, any counsel for women in our industry? You're muted.
I'm channeling our friend Bobby Stuckey with the mute button. The one thing that we can do as the Independent Restaurant Coalition to support women in this industry, because we are singularly focused on getting financial support, is to keep pushing and make sure that we work as hard as we can to save this industry so that women have a place to grow and develop as into the amazing leaders in this industry that they have the potential to be. We need to save restaurants. That is the best thing we can do. We can do it with the Restaurants Act, as Andrew and Claire have indicated, as Tom has said he supports. The Restaurants Act that is currently sitting in the Senate with 50 co-sponsors needs to pass to get funding to women and small businesses nationwide.
I want to thank you all. It's been, now we have literally 2 minutes left. I really want to thank you all for coming together in this one forum. I know we've spent an inordinate amount of it on the Restaurants Act, which literally is our only salvation, either that or some stimulus really fast. I do hope, though, that once this panel is done, that we will all come together to amplify our voices much more, because these 3 entities represent I mentioned it at the outset, but you're the fulcrum. You represent the 500,000 or the million of us in Washington, D.C. We are not the 3 airlines, we are not the 10 banks, but you are our voice over there. So there's a lot riding on you on our behalf. And it's a rich, dynamic, amazing industry that everyone loves. So there's no dearth of support behind you. I'd love to, any 20 seconds to say goodbye to our panel. Andrew, start with you.
Wonderful to be a part of a thrilling conversation, and I hope people don't take away from this that this is a contentious issue. Obviously, there are elements of this that people disagree on, but I think the one thing that we all agree on, we've all said it, the Restaurants Act has to pass, and everyone who is listening should get behind it 100% and arm twist every politician they possibly can, even at the state and local level, because they can reach out to Washington.
Tom?
I would just say thank you for being part of this. Continue to represent the fact that we're much better together as one. And I think the more we can come together and solve things as as an organization and certainly as an industry, we'll be much more effective. So thank you.
Claire?
I agree. I also just want to recognize just the dire straits that people are going through right now. And I just want to we're a resource and we are here to help. So please reach out.
Erika?
I want to thank you, Rohini, for making this happen, and Claire and the JBF team once again for convening us, and remind everybody that your voice matters. It's telling your story and providing the insight, knowledge that you have that our political leaders don't about how this industry works that will ultimately create change now and in the future. So please use your voice.
Thank you all for being a part of this. And here's to optimism, passing stimulus, Restaurants Act, and getting out of this pandemic all intact. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you all.